Let's go.
That's pretty good. Hi, everyone. Once again, thanks for coming out here. I'm going to go for about a half hour with this material, but I wanted to start out with a song for a particular reason, and I'll tell you what the reason is after I sing the song. This is a song called Me and Jack, and it's a youthful fantasy of traveling with Jack Kerouac. I wrote it. Me and Jack go down to the railroad track with our packs on our backs to catch that midnight train. Dark box car rolling through the night, take us away from the light of the city once again. We'll climb inside. Hey, where does this one go? Brother, some say it goes down to Mexico, but no one really knows. Ah, you holy fool, you stole the family jewels, broke all their rules. Jack, you better lay low. Now who do you think could catch up with you? Your traveling bed is for free. Well, the world's cold beauty is laid at your feet, but it's not eternity. Me and Jack go down to the railroad track, oh, with our packs on our backs to catch that midnight train. So then, let's see, I'm going to put these here. Oh, you took it away from me again. Yeah, I'm very democratic about these things. I like to get down here with the people. The people, that's right. So, here we go. So anyway, reason I started with that is, I went through a singer-songwriter period when I was in my 20s, and that's one of maybe 3 or 4 songs that I wrote that I still like. But also, I think it says something about my youthful infatuation with Jack Kerouac. I discovered Kerouac when I was still in high school. Lived up in a little town in northern Wisconsin, a little mill town, and I was probably the only person that even heard of Kerouac there. I happened to have a high school friend who moved out to Arizona, and his English teacher there at his high school had claimed some shirt-tail relationship with the beatniks in North Beach, California. So, of course, I was really interested, and I got in touch with this teacher, and he sent me a bunch of books. I think of it as my beat packet. So this was On the Road by Kerouac, and a couple of books by Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. It just popped into my mailbox in Cornell, Wisconsin, and changed my life. So by that time, we're talking about maybe 64, 65. The beats were pretty much a done thing already. Most of what Kerouac writes about took place in the 40s and 50s, kind of post-World War II, up into late 50s, early 60s. So what was starting to happen at that time was hippie was just getting ready to happen, and I was the right age in between beatnik and hippie to become a hippie. So that's what happened to me. But I think all of us then at that time were inspired by Kerouac, and I'll read a little piece that I think is a direct inspiration for the hippies that was passed down by the Beats in a few minutes. But I had a certain idea who Kerouac was at that time, and as with so many ideas and images, it turned out to be a really incomplete one. It was one that maybe had some basis in fact, but it was largely mythology, and it didn't have a lot to do with the full truth of who Kerouac was. I think we still think of Kerouac as this footloose, kind of carefree, happy soul who was just bumming around America and having a good time, and digging the jazz and doing his writing and getting high in various ways. That's all kind of all true, mostly true. The carefree part is not true. And as I read more and more of Kerouac into my adulthood, I realized how incomplete and how partial that image of Kerouac was. But it's still the one that the culture at large carries. I know I have some younger friends, and they still hold that image of Kerouac. And I think you have to get to be a certain age and read a certain amount into him before you see this. There's a lot of material out there, so it's ripe for digging. But one of the things that I came to recognize, in my adult life, in my adult reading of him, was that he was primarily a spiritual writer, which I don't think I would have argued with that when I was a teenager, but that wasn't front and center. It was more the kicks that I was interested in. I thought I was at that time. So Kerouac, I don't know. Let me see how many people here have read a bit of Kerouac. I'm just curious. All right, so some people haven't read him at all. That's interesting. I'm going to make some recommendations before I'm through. He was, and I've got everything Kerouac's basically. I was collecting it since I was 16, 17. I've got it all. He was a French Canadian. Grew up speaking French in industrial town in Massachusetts called Lowell. So he grew up in a working class French Canadian family, very Catholic family. So his basic grounding spiritually was Catholicism, and you can see that in his writing, especially in his writings about childhood. When he writes about his childhood, you get a sense of a kind of a mystical Catholicism that comes into them. There's a book of his called Visions of Gerard. It's one of his lesser known books, but maybe one of his more beautiful books, about an older brother of his who died at the age of 9 years old. I can't remember what the ailment was, but Kerouac was about 4 years younger. So it's a book remembering his older brother, Gerard, from childhood, who his mother and Kerouac subsequently were convinced was a saint. So this is a beautiful, strange book, Visions of Gerard. I'm not going to read anything from that right now. What I wanted to more emphasize in this part was when he got out to California in the early to mid 50s, he started hanging out with Gary Snyder, poet Gary Snyder, who was like a serious, committed Zen Buddhist. And Snyder turned Kerouac on to Zen Buddhism. And this was something that really enlarged Kerouac's spiritual outlook, but at the same time, in some ways, it really meshed with that kind of mystical Catholicism that was his basis. There's a book that, another one that's not very well known, but it's probably one of my favorite Kerouac books. It's called The Scripture of the Golden Eternity. And it's not fiction, it's kind of a meditation. So here's what happened. Kerouac is hanging out on the Pacific coast with Snyder. And here's how Kerouac describes it. In the spring of 1956, Gary Snyder said, "All right, Kerouac, it's about time for you to write a sutra." Okay, now a sutra is a scripture, a thread of discourse in Buddhism. So Kerouac took it seriously, and Kerouac is known for his spontaneity, for his spontaneous writing, just writing all night and not revising anything, just kind of prizing the original, the original energy of the draft, and not going in for revision very much. But with this, the scripture of the golden eternity, Kerouac says he said in pencil, how he wrote it in pencil, carefully revised and everything, because it was a scripture. I had no right to be spontaneous, which is really interesting. That's an interesting take. So I wanted to give you a sample of the scripture of the golden eternity. This is just a fantastic passage. It's a little book, it's about 60, 70 pages, and pages aren't very big. But it conveys a certain vision of life, of spirituality, of the universe. So Kerouac had a Satori, which is a moment, of just kind of mystical insight. And this is how he describes it, okay? I was smelling flowers in the yard, and when I stood up, I took a deep breath, and the blood all rushed to my brain, and I woke up dead on my back in the grass. I had apparently fainted or died for about 60 seconds. My neighbor saw me, but he thought I had just suddenly thrown myself on the grass to enjoy the sun. During that timeless moment of unconsciousness, I saw the golden eternity. I saw heaven. In it, nothing had ever happened. The events of 1,000,000 years ago were just as phantom and ungraspable as the events of now or the events of the next 10 minutes. It was perfect, the golden solitude, the golden emptiness, something or other, something surely humble. There was a rapturous ring of silence abiding perfectly. There was no question of being alive or not being alive, of likes and dislikes, of near or far, no question of giving or gratitude, no question of mercy or judgment, or of suffering or its opposite, or anything. It was the womb itself, aloneness, alaya vijnana, the universal store, the great free treasure, the great victory, infinite completion, the joyful, mysterious essence of arrangement. It seemed like one smiling smile, one adorable adoration, one gracious and adorable charity, everlasting safety, refreshing afternoon, roses, infinite, brilliant, immaterial gold ash, the golden age. The golden came from the sun in my eyelids, and the eternity from my sudden instant realization as I woke up that I had just been where it all came from and where it was all returning, the everlasting so. And so never coming or going. Therefore I call it the golden eternity, but you could call it anything you want. As I regained consciousness, I felt so sorry I had a body and a mind. Suddenly realized I didn't even have a body and a mind, and nothing had ever happened, and everything is all right forever and forever and forever. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Whoa! Find me a more rapturous passage in literature than that. Scripture of the Golden Trinity, highly recommended. So, let's see, wow, I've lost that one here. So let's see, what time is it? Yeah, so I wanted to also talk about Kerouac as a nature writer. Now, it's been known for a long time that Kerouac, was a spiritual writer. This has been understood. But lately, I should also mention that what occasioned for me this re-examination and revisiting of Kerouac was the 100th anniversary of his birth on March 12th of this year. So this is kind of the third time I've been out in the public celebrating that. So it kind of plunged me back into Kerouac too, and read some things that I hadn't read before or had forgotten about, whatnot. But somebody in the Wall Street Journal, in an article that I can't get access to because I don't want to subscribe to it online, wrote an appreciation of Kerouac as a nature writer, and I just looked, I looked at the description of that, and then I went back and started looking at his work, and I thought, yeah, that's right. So it's really true that some of Kerouac's more rhapsodic writing is really not about the beat community or his adventures or his drunken sprees, of which there were many. Things like that. It was more his time out there in America, on the American landscape. If you look at his books like On the Road and The Dharma Bums, they're in one sense they're travel books, and there's a lot of solitude in them where he's just kind of between cities and he's out there, in the desert or in the mountains or in the woods. He loved that. It's really clear. It's really clear that he paid careful attention to the natural world. So that's starting to be recognized. And I thought, yeah, we can do a mountain now, gents. If you're only going to have one Kerouac book, here's the one to buy. Get the Dharma Bums. It's probably his most joyful novel. Part of the reason it's so joyful is because Gary Snyder is a character in it, right at the middle of it. His novels are all thinly disguised autobiography. So the Gary Snyder character in Dharma Bums is named Jaffe Ryder. Gary Snyder, Jaffe Ryder. Pretty easy to figure out. And I remember when Gary Snyder came to town here to visit the university about 1969. I saw him from a distance. He's kind of a small guy, and he had this backpack on him. It's about as big as he was. And I saw him walking through campus, and I thought, my God, that's him. That's Jaffe Ryder. Kerouac described him to a T. So this is a passage from Dharma Bums. Now, this is the landscape that is featured in that book. It's called Matterhorn Peak, And it's in the Sierra Nevada on the northern edge of Yosemite. And Snyder took Kerouac and another friend, John Montgomery, who in the book is called Henry Morley, so that's who Morley is. He was a librarian, I think, in San Francisco, up to climb the mountain. Wow. So that's what they were doing. So this is part of Kerouac's description, and the whole first 100 pages of Dharma Bums is really kind of a rhapsody of, being out in the mountains and in the woods and in nature with Snyder. And Snyder's, fantastic, high spirits and energy. It's just a wonderful book. All right, so this comes about 60 pages in. They're climbing. We went on, and I was immensely pleased with the way the trail had a kind of immortal look to it. In the early afternoon now, the way the side of the grassy hill seemed to be clouded with ancient gold dust, and the bugs flipped over rocks, and the wind sighed in shimmering dances over the hot rocks, and the way the trail would suddenly come into a cool, shady part with big trees overhead, and hear the light deeper. And the way the lake below as soon became a toy lake with those black well holes perfectly visible still, and the giant cloud shadows on the lake, and the tragic little road winding away where poor Morley was walking back. Apparently Morley didn't have the stamina to make the climb with Snyder and Kerouac. Jaffe took a long look, quote, "I see a little cloud of dust, maybe that's him coming back already." But it seemed that I had seen the ancient afternoon of that trail from meadow rocks and lupine posies to sudden revisits with the roaring stream with its splashed snag bridges and undersea greennesses. There was something inexpressibly broken in my heart, as though I'd lived before and walked this trail under similar circumstances with a fellow bodhisattva, but maybe on a more important journey. I felt like lying down on the side of the trail and remembering it all. The woods do that to you. They always look familiar, long lost, like the face of a long dead relative, like an old dream, like a piece of forgotten song drifting across the water. Most of all, like golden eternities of past childhood or past manhood, and all the living and the dying and the heartbreak that went on a million years ago. And the clouds, as they pass overhead, seem to testify by their own lonesome familiarity to this feeling. Ecstasy, even, I felt with flashes of sudden remembrance, and feeling sweaty and drowsy, I felt like sleeping and dreaming in the grass. Well, you hear echoes of that golden eternity scripture in that too. This is very much that same period, and I think it's probably one of the best periods of Kerouac's life. I was talking about how Kerouac and the Beats influenced the counterculture to come. If this isn't a blueprint for that, I don't know what is. This is a little riff that Snyder did on that same trip. So one of Kerouac's real geniuses was to be able to capture the conversational styles and voices of other people and his friends. So he got Snyder just to a T once again. So this is Snyder speaking. "Give me another slug of that jug. How, ho, who?" Jaffe leaping up. "I've been reading Whitman. Know what he says? Cheer up, slaves, and horrify the foreign despots. He means that's the attitude for the bard, the Zen lunacy bard of old desert paths. See, the whole thing is a world full of rucksack wanderers, Dharma bums, refusing to subscribe to the general demand that they consume production and therefore have to work for the privilege of consuming all that crap they didn't really want anyway, such as refrigerators, TV sets, cars, at least new fancy cars, certain hair oils and deodorants, and general junk you finally always see a week later in the garbage anyway. All of them imprisoned in a system of work, produce, consume, work, produce, consume. I see a vision of a great rucksack revolution, thousands or even millions of young Americans wandering around with rucksacks, going up to the mountains to pray, making children laugh and old men glad, making young girls happy and old girls happier. All of them Zen lunatics who go about writing poems that happen to appear in their heads for no reason, and also by being kind and also by strange, unexpected acts, keep giving visions of eternal freedom to everybody and to all living creatures. That's what I like about you, Goldbook and Smith, you two guys from the East Coast, which I thought was dead. And then Smith is Kerouac's alter ego in this book, and Goldbook is Allen Ginsberg. And then somebody says, we thought the West Coast was dead. And Snyder replies, you really brought a fresh wind around here. Why, do you realize the Jurassic pure granite of Sierra Nevada with the straggling high conifers of the last ice age and lakes we just saw as one of the greatest expressions on this earth? Just think how truly great and wise America will be with all this energy and exuberance and space focused into the Dharma. Yes. So how can you not get excited reading something like that? So that's from those two passages from the Dharma Bombs. Can I go 10 more minutes with this? Is that all right? Is that okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay, all right. I got the okay. Okay, so I think I'll need it. I'm not sure. What I wanted to say now is that, you know, this was probably one of the most joyful periods of Kerouac's life, and unfortunately, alcoholism was his demon. I think he was alcoholic pretty much through the whole thing, through all of his life, adult life, but because he had a certain kind of sensitivity that really wounded him to the world. You know, I think that he was not really made for this world. And later on, his work becomes very sad. So, you know, you want to catch him at his kind of literal peak. You know, you've got Dharma Bums, you know, on Mount Matterhorn Peak. What I realized after a point was that he was really kind of not a happy soul. I have a quote here in 1958. He was interviewed by Mike Wallace on television, and here's the exchange. Wallace said, "You don't sound happy." And Kerouac responded, "Oh, I'm tremendously sad. I'm in great despair." So this was Kerouac, shortly after the time of what I just read. So there was something there that was really going wrong for him. He was in his late 30s. He died in 1969 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Pretty much sidelined, off the road. Hippies coming to visit him and pay homage, but he couldn't even relate to it. He was too deep into his grief. And so he dies at age 47 of alcohol-related abdominal hemorrhage. So this is a sad person. There's a story, kind of a horrifying story of him fairly late in his life, and sometime in the 60s, visiting a friend, and them just binging. And at that time, Kerouac was putting away like a fifth of Courvoisier every day. So it was he's a complicated, flawed genius, but a genius. And you don't have to read very far into him to realize how intelligent and well-read he was. He had tremendous intellectual grasp, and I think that when it was going well, and when his control was good, his writing is brilliant. There's a lot of bad Kerouac. It's just the way it is. With him, you have to read selectively and find the good and value that. So I was talking about him as a nature writer, and one of the things that is well known about him is his love of animals and his love of creatures, small creatures. A great generous sympathy. Well, I think he had a great generous sympathy for all living beings, but he had a lot of trouble with humans. Great cat lover. I think, well, when you came in here, there you go, there he is. That may have been his type, his cat type, his favorite cat. You can just see how attached he is. So I think that also some of his best nature writing came out in his haiku. He wrote a lot of haiku, and a lot of them are really good. There's a little book called the Book of Haiku that collects, a few hundred of them. And I've got a little sampler of that here, just to read you a few haiku. Now, the deal with haiku is it's very immediate, and you try to catch the essence of a moment just very quickly, like in one grab. It's like grabbing a firefly out of the air. So you have to do it, within a very short space, like 3 lines traditionally, like 17 syllables. Anybody here written any haiku? I'm just curious. No? Yeah.
When I was working with the kids here, we had a haiku thing, and we had
Oh.
all the kids, and then we did a little presentation. So it was really, really fun.
That's great.
Did a great job with it.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Haiku is often taught to children because there's something of like the child's mind in the way you work with haiku. Of course, to get a really good one, good literary haiku is another matter, but sometimes you get lucky. So I'll just read you a few of his. And haiku, traditionally, one of the rules of it is has to refer to a season. The Japanese, who essentially invented this, had a complicated seasonal code. So if a certain bird or a certain plant was mentioned, we as Westerners might not recognize that, but they would know what season it belonged to. Okay, so here's one of his haiku. 1st December cold wave. Not even one cricket. Summer night. The kitten playing with the Zen calendar. Empty baseball field. A robin hops along the bench. And they they catch just a little glimpse of something that evokes the feeling of being here on Earth. Here's another cat one. The house cats, amazed at something new, looking in the same direction. Yeah, he knows cats. Some of them don't have animals in them. Perfectly silent in the starry night. The little tree. And you just feel his affection, for Earth, for the beings there. Now this is a funny one. The cow taking a big dreamy crap, turning to look at me. Couple more. This could be a Japanese woodcut. The low yellow moon above the quiet lamplit house. This is one of my favorites. In my medicine cabinet, the winter fly has died of old age. Boy, that's got pathos and deep sympathy for living. And then one more. Haiku, schmaiku, I can't understand the intention of reality. Haiku, schmaiku, I can't understand the intention of reality. So this is a little sampler of Kerouac, and I have my own just mini Kerouac story, like 2 degrees separation story. He died in 1969 in St. Petersburg, Florida. I had followed a girlfriend down there in an ill-fated love affair. It's the same, it's the kind you have when you're 21, usually. And but one thing that was interesting was her father, Claude, was he was a social worker in Tampa. It turned out that he was a drinking buddy of Kerouac's. So there's a little anecdote about Kerouac embedded in this little prose poem I'm going to read you. And I'll have to add, when I left St. Petersburg, Kerouac's name was still listed in the St. Petersburg phone directory, so I ripped it out and stuffed it into my backpack, and it became one of my prized souvenirs. There it is, Jack Kerouac, Street, St. Petersburg, Florida, with the phone number. I was too late. It was a year too late. Okay, so I started out with the song Me and Jack. That was how I saw Kerouac when I was, let's say 23, 24. I've been writing about him again now, and I guess this is how I see him now. It's a prose poem called Kerouac, and it was written this spring. Kerouac, you went all out to catch the moment, grab it, tuck it under your arm like a football and run like hell with it. There was no one on the field to lay a finger on you. You never found a home out there in all those desolations. You were a writer, and that immersion, that absorption, that loss of your troubled, sad self in the writing looks to me like where you really lived. It's for sure where you live now. 53 years after you departed into that great vortex of St. Petersburg, all the psychics say is wired with the energy of so many leaving. That's where your earthly road ended, unspooled into an eternity you anticipated with such beauty and hope. My girlfriend Robin's father drank with you at the Boar's Head and told me how once you gentled a savage drunk, notorious for biting off a man's nose. Thrilling to know someone who'd known you, even that little. I was 20 and I thought I knew you, but I was wrong. I knew only part of you, and maybe the least part. Yes, you were a storyteller, but you were also the observer, the rememberer, the detailer, the describer, the recorder, the lover, the griever, the praiser, the seer, the hearer, the prayer, the player, the meaning always subsumed by the sound you were after, the single long note you wanted to blow. Spontaneous, you caught the rhythm, the cadence, the beat. You improvised with the best of them until you finally blew out of this world altogether. All those frantic nights, typing what you thought was a roman fleuve, French term for kind of a novel flood. If you write a whole bunch of novels all about the same thing, the same character, same story, Balzac did that. Roman fleuve, novel flood. All those frantic nights typing what, my French is probably crappy, sorry. All those frantic nights typing what you thought was a roman flute, you were actually carving a mountain, like those intricate Chinese jades, big enough to contain your immense exuberance, tenderness, and loss. Having hiked with you down for 60